The one I'm going to talk about today is one that I think probably all of us have had some familiarity with. It's the commandment that talks about idolatry. Let me read the text for you. We're in Exodus 20, verses 4 through 6. It says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." So I'm going to start not by diving directly into the commandment, but one of the things I wanted to do is to start with a warning. Because one of the things we're going to see is that it took literally no more than 40 days and 40 nights for the people of Israel to break this commandment. And this was after the people confirmed the covenant. They shed sacrificial blood, they sacrificed a bull, and they confirmed with Aaron and with Moses that they would follow the commandments at all times. And they confess that in Exodus 24, 3 through 5, it says that all the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And literally 40 days later, that commandment was broken. And it tells us this in Exodus 32:1. And the reason they broke it is because they became impatient when Moses went back up onto Mount Sinai in order to receive instruction about the tabernacle, how it should be structured, how it should be furnished, and then what the nature of the priesthood is supposed to be about. And he was gone for 40 days and 40 nights. And during that time, the people became very impatient. They were unwilling to wait on Moses. And again, this is about 3 months into their journey after leaving Egypt. This is not the depths of the 40 years that they wandered in the wilderness, but this is just immediately after they've been rescued from Egypt. And they've already become impatient and want to move on. And so what they do is they pressure Aaron to build an idol so that they can worship that idol as they depart. Because in their mind, Moses is not returning. Even though he's only been gone for 40 days and 40 nights, they believe that Moses will not reappear. And so Aaron crumbles under kind of the weight of the grumbling of the people. And, it's interesting to me, but that in many cases, when I have disobeyed God, it is largely because of this kind of pressure from people who did not know Christ, did not know God, who are not followers, and who put pressure on us to act a certain way or to be a certain way. And you see here, even though Aaron was a devoted follower and a companion of Moses, he crumbles under this pressure. And so what he does is he asks everyone to contribute gold jewelry, gold bracelets, and they melt it all down, and he crafts a golden calf, which becomes the idol. Now, one of the things I want to do is make a distinction between the people and Aaron. Because I believe in this instance that Aaron was making an idol to reflect the living God. Whereas the people didn't care that it was necessarily God. They just wanted a God. They wanted an idol, something that they could follow as they began their journey out of the wilderness. Aaron, on the other hand, I think, and this doesn't make it right, but I think that when he produces this calf, in his mind, it is an image of the living God. So his motivation was correct, but his actions, we're going to see, were sinful. And he even declares to the people that this is the God that brought you out of the land of Egypt. This was in Exodus 32:4. And he makes a proclamation that tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And so this is why I think Aaron is actually building this calf as a reflection of or as an image of the true God. And so why the sudden breaking of the commandment? If you think about this, the first and the second commandments are tied together. The first says, "You shall have no other God before me." The second says, you shall not carve any images or idols of gods. And so they form a pair. So if you violate the second commandment, you're also violating the first commandment just by its proximity and the fact that those two are tied together. And I think one of the things you see here is that the first commandment actually deals with whom we worship. This is the true God. The second concerns how we worship, not in our own preferred way, and not by accepting or adopting practices of other religions or other faiths or other non-believers, even in the world today. Rather, I think it says, and what God's intention was by giving the commandment, was that we worship God only in the ways that He reveals. That we don't worship God according to our own perspective, primarily because none of us knows God in His entirety. We know elements, we know pieces. As we mature in Christ, that image gets closer and closer to us having identification with it. We begin to understand the image. We begin to see God in the things that we do. But until we reach heaven, we will never truly understand the image of God, all of His characteristics, His attributes, all the many things that He does, the blessings. There are only glimpses of things that we can see from that. And so, and one of the things that I think it's problematic for us is that in many ways, God asks us to worship Him and to have image of Him in ways that are both uncomfortable and that are counter-cultural. If you think about the way our world exists today, I saw an image the other day in the National Cathedral when Trump visited for his the prayer service. And there was a female pastor of the Lutheran faith. And her image was one very much of protect those who are LGBTQ plus whatever, and her message was that they have to be protected at all costs. I saw a city town council service where some trans people were protesting and wanting a town in Maine to become a sanctuary city for trans people. And there was a pastor who was in a clerical collar who came in and basically said that Christ was a woman and had transitioned from being male to female. Now, these are images that the world, and there are people who will follow that, there will be people who will accept that, there are people who will adopt those images. But one of the things that you see is that this countercultural revolution has a great impact on the church. It has a great impact on the image of God, of how people perceive Christianity, of how they perceive a relationship with Christ. And instead, what I think we all know, being mature in our faith, is that sometimes worshiping God is an uncomfortable process because He makes us face truths about ourselves that we would often just as soon not face. So after 40 days, Moses returns, and he's brought great instruction for the people about how the tabernacle is to be constructed, how it's to be furnished, how the priesthood is to be set up. And there are pages and pages and pages in Exodus that give out the detail associated with what this is. But as you can expect, when Moses returns, and after accepting the the approval and acclaim of the commandments by the people of Israel, and having them make the commitment that they will follow and be obedient to these commandments, when he returns and immediately finds out that they have violated that second commandment, he is very angry, and he claims 3 times that the people have created a great sin or committed a great sin. This is Exodus 32, 21, 31, and 32. So in Exodus 32, 32, Moses even attempts to pray to God to say, if these people have offended you, please separate me from them so that I don't get blasted with the same set of judgment that you're about to bring down on the people of Israel. At that point, though, one of the things you see is that God, in his mercy and his grace, says, I will not punish this people, and I want you to continue to lead them. So why is carving an idol, even if it represents God, why is that such a great sin? Yeah.
It's considered as almost a hatred of the true God. You're not worshiping him. You put something in his place.
Right.
It's not real, that's made by man.
Yeah.
He's so much greater than whatever it is that you can conceive and put display.
Yeah. I mean, it limits what we perceive or what we know about the true God, because man cannot craft an image that is magnificent enough, if you will, to encompass what God is and what he means to us. Yes?
We have noticeable crosses in our home. Some people might consider them idols, but we do not worship them. And we do not ascribe to those physical crosses any power of salvation or anything. That's a reminder of the truth of Christ on the cross and his dying for us. We don't consider that an idol, but what's going on in Exodus here, it's just crazy. It's like we're worshiping the calf and everything. And that's why Aaron doesn't get to go to the promised land. But of course he dies and is buried on Mount Horeb. You know the rest of the story. But he was not to go to the promised land, nor was Moses for a separate incident. I'll talk about that later.
And you bring up a great point, because there is a difference between idolatry and artistic impression or artistic representation. And the cross is a representation of what Christ did for us. His death, his resurrection, and his atonement. And so having artistic impression is completely different than carving out an idol. And so...
It's kind of where our heart is.
Yes.
It's where our heart is. It's with idolized money, another woman, or some sort of essence of any kind. It's where your heart is. And it grieves God when our heart is not aligned with him.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I think for those who worship idols, they're taking away God's glory, giving it to man-made objects.
Mm-hmm.
That's intrinsically wrong.
Right. And I'm going to cover that one in a few slides. So why isn't the first commandment enough? Because in essence, what the Israelites are saying is, I shall have no other God before you. And yet I'm saying that's not enough. I need another idol. I need another something in my life in order to follow. Why isn't the first commandment enough? There are a lot of unbelievers who don't believe God is enough. There are a lot of believers who believe God is not enough. If God was enough, then we wouldn't willingly set out to solve our own problems with our own strength, with our own solutions, with our own minds. Instead of turning to God, instead of getting on our knees in prayer, instead of using solutions from the world or using solutions from friends or family. So it's not just an unbeliever issue. This is also a believer issue. Is God truly enough for us not to violate the second commandment by finding idols of our own that we set up in our lives that replace or seek to replace the living God? And I loved your point about that.
Well, how about the staff of Elisha? They're gonna say, resuscitate this woman, and so lay the staff. And guess what? The staff, the power of the wood, doesn't revive her.
Right.
And then she's revived later. But, I mean, that is a powerful message in the Old Testament. Say, hey, it's not the idol, it's the salvation.
Right. So in essence, by carving the golden calf, both Aaron and the Israelites are essentially saying to themselves, I don't necessarily believe the first commandment, because they're tied together. That I don't believe that God is the only true living God, that there must be other powers out there that I can tap into or that I can somehow integrate into my life that I either feel more comfortable with or that don't force me to confront the truth of God. And I think we're going to see that here. So the question I asked myself when I was putting this lesson together is there an underlying logic to the second commandment that makes its breaking so severe? And so let's kind of move on and we'll see what that says. So I think the second commandment is really talking to us about the true God. And the key point here that I want to make is that He is not the God of our making. He's not the God of our imagination. He is not even the God of our own discovery, because all things related to God are given to us through faith, through His grace, through His mercy, through the relationship that we have with Christ. Absent that, we would know nothing about God. We all would be sin, all would be filthy rags. And so what you see here is this is why carving a golden calf, and again, we're going to talk about the fact that golden calf is just a representation of idolatry. But when you're in the middle of worshiping other idols, what you're essentially saying is that I have a better view, I have a better interpretation, I have a better concept of what God is than God does Himself. That's why this is such a great and terrible sin. And yet, every day, I find something in my life that, if absent some discipline and absent some tight reins and just an ability to stay grounded in the Word, I find things every day that could turn into an idol for me. Netflix is an idol, could be an idol. All the streaming services, all the shows that are fun to watch and have, very much entertainment can become an idol. Yes, sports teams. I can't wait for the season to start. Every night I watch the baseball game. How much more would I do if I turned that television off and instead was in the Word or was faithfully serving up here? I mean, it's in and of itself, none of this is idolatry. It's how we treat it. It's how it becomes important to us where we cross the line from simply an image or simply an idol to idolatry. The other thing is that God doesn't want to be represented by the things that we think of as idols. He really wants to show us who He is through the world, not through culture, not through the things that people do, but through His creation, through the beauty and the magnificence of the world, through the power that comes in the storms that we exhibit. You were talking about this rain that was coming down torrentially and the fires that destroy. I mean, that's where we get an image of the power and just the sheer magnitude of who God is. And He takes the initiative Himself to speak to us and reveal the truth about who He is. He doesn't need us to reveal that truth to ourselves. He will do that Himself. He'll do it through the Holy Spirit, and He'll do it through Jesus Christ. What I think is also important here is that by carving out idols, one of the things that you begin to lose sight of is how much sin corrupts this world. Because when we are worshiping golf or the Astros or family or our work or wealth or acclaim or any of these things, when that becomes the focus of our worship, one of the things that we lose sight of is that in and of itself is sin. And God doesn't want us to be blinded to sin. He certainly doesn't want it for believers. He doesn't want it for unbelievers. But yet, one of the things we're going to see here is that sin is predominantly the reason why I think the Second Commandment gets broken so frequently. And this last point here is it would be inconsistent with the nature of God, who speaks and takes initiative to show us who he is, to leave it to his people to dream up or adopt from other cultures what it looks like to worship him. But there's another dimension that I want to get to here. The Second Commandment talks about and reveals the nature of God himself. But I think it also reveals and speaks to who we are as humans. Because we are his creatures. We are made in his image. And by worshiping something other than God himself, one of the things that we're doing is, and I love this word, it's indignifying who we are as human beings. We're replacing the image of ourselves with the images that we see in culture and around us, in civilization, society. And I think to break the Second Commandment, it not only rejects God, but it also rejects the image of who we are. Because we are the image of God. And I think this is really the key point for us as believers. He made us in his image to display, reflect, and visibly represent who he is. So when we worship idols, we're not demonstrating or even illustrating to the world who God truly is. And we become no better than non-believers, who are just as poor at illustrating or demonstrating who God is. Idolatry is critical in terms of keeping us from that right relationship with God. And I think you see here, but the very nature of sin, and we're going to talk about what how Paul describes it in Romans 1, 22 and 23. The very nature of sin is that we as believers and people who have been made in his image, we will reject the high calling of being made in that image and will make images for ourselves simply because we are sinful, corrupt people. And we will fight against that nature until we go to heaven and are made perfectly at that point. Paul says in Romans 1, 22 and 23, claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. And the key here word is image, because I think one of the things that you're going to see is that we substitute God for other things. And because we're comfortable with those other things, because those other things don't face us in the mirror, because they don't hold us accountable, they don't require righteousness, they don't require faith, they don't require humility, they don't require any of the things that a relationship with God is intended to provide for us. And so the very nature of sin is that we actually hate God. Our sin asks us to hate God. And that we would rather substitute any other image for God than God himself. And this is a real indictment. And I think if you look at the church today, it's really hard to find a church like ours that is so deeply rooted in the Word, is so deeply rooted in perfecting our faith through relationship with Christ. And I think and somebody said it, I don't remember who said it, but when we substitute images for God, what they do is they diminish God's glory. And they distort the truth about God, a truth we don't often want to know or even acknowledge. And I think even in Paul's day and age, I'm sure there were images of the tabernacle or images of the Pharisees, images of how life was lived out. But there's never been a preponderance of availability of images than there is in our society today. You can go to the internet, you can go to TV, you can go to magazines, you can go to live shows. There are all kinds of places and things that we can go to in order to see images that we might find comfortable, that we might find entertaining, that we might find that develop happiness. Not joy, but happiness. And I think the key for us is, how do we avoid having those things become idols? How do we avoid spending time on things that do not help us perfect our walk with Christ? I'm sorry?
Putting God first.
Yeah. And I will be the first to acknowledge there are days when I don't want to put God first. I don't want him to have reign. I don't want him to be supreme. I don't want to learn the lessons that he's trying to teach me. I don't want to know any more about the Word. There are just days where I struggle to take that next step, which is one reason why we build up habits of just being in the Word, of being on our knees, because that can see you through. But there are days when the last thing I want is to hear another word about God. But the key here is that these images that we embed in our lives, they suppress the truth and the knowledge about God. So when you find an idol, or you find an image in your life that is beginning to take up more time than you would like, I think one of the things you have to understand is that is the time to begin to seek out how those images can be removed. Yeah.
I'm struggling with something here. Idols, yes. One is clear, don't make the idols. And one can also get into it knowingly, unintentionally.
Sure.
The second part of that command is, don't worship the idols. Bow down to the idols. In my opinion, worship is an intentional thing. I don't think you can be worshiping an idol unintentionally. This is where my conclusion comes from. Is it possible that you are doing something that amounts to idol worship, but you didn't intend it to be so?
That's a good question. Yeah, Carol.
This is really interesting. I got a text from my oldest son yesterday. And his question was, did I agree with this person? The headline says, popular pastor believes the church violates the...
Wait, it says what?
Believes that the chosen violates the Second Commandment. And the point that the guy's making in the article was that the guy portraying Jesus then becomes Jesus to people rather than really seeing who he is. Well, I do not believe that in any way the chosen intends for Jesus to be an idol. Answer to what you're saying, there was one man that commented that he found himself praying and picturing the God who portrays Jesus. Okay, so inadvertently, I think sometimes we can. So maybe the key is that we focus on who God is, and we do something you just said, habit to stay
Yeah. But I would even, I agree with what you said, but I would say this, that it may not extend to worship, but every moment we spend away from a path set out by Christ for us, every moment we either ignore, whether it's unintentional or not, is time that we're not in the presence of God. And so whether it seeks to rise to the level of worship, it is still violating, I think, the spirit of the commandment, which is we're allowing images to flood into our lives. And we can be even unintentionally, we can be surrounded by those images and can be influenced by those images. Yes, ma'am.
That stuff, and you know what you're not supposed to do, that's not what you're supposed to do. And just because you get a bad old week, I play golf, whatever, love it, doesn't mean down. That's mine. I just love it. So, but my
You can
heart,
do it on Sunday morning.
yeah, but it's all about where my heart is.
Sure.
I think that's the whole point of looking at what's the idols and what's not is where your heart is. Nobody's will ever be perfect. I will never be perfect. I know where my heart is. I won't get you there.
And I completely agree with you. My point is that we can be distracted by things, and they may not even rise to the level of idolatry, but we can be distracted from who we are in Christ simply by allowing the world to intrude upon who we are. And we have to be very careful to guard against them becoming not just an entertainment or not just a fun thing that we like to do, but that we, for example, don't go to church because we're playing golf. Or my group is having a Bible study on Saturday mornings. I probably should go, but Saturday mornings when I play golf. Okay, what's the balance between obedience to fellowshipping with brothers in my class versus simply going out and playing 18 holes of golf? You're right, it's a hard issue, but it can also be entirely distracting from us and take us away from our walk with Christ, is I guess the only point I'm making. So I'm agreeing with you. Heart is really the key thing here.
One thing with me is because I mess up all the time. I tell people I mess up all the time. See me do that. But what I realize is when people I'll be like, oh wait, I'm necessarily. So I guess my birth, seeing me, I'm being perfect. I gave my testimony, did a lot. So I guess I'm giving people my testimony. So that's kind of
Yeah. Kind of the last point here is that while I think we're not carving golden calves, we're not melting gold down like Aaron and the Israelites did. The thing is, though, that we chase the same kinds of idols. We chase wealth, we chase fame, power, relationships. We lust after things, we covet after things. Like I said, almost except for murder and adultery, I've broken every one of those commandments. And yes.
It bothered me that you say you haven't found it in 6 and 7. Jesus says if you look at a
Oh, you're right. You're right.
husband and everything, and you look at that woman, say you're a male, and you look at that woman, wow, that could be us, or that could be whatever. So Jesus said, don't think you can skate right up to the edge of sin.
You're right.
And not be part of sin.
You're right.
But what about murder? Most of us haven't murdered anyone in here. But he's saying we've done things to kill them spiritually and emotionally and everything that are like that. So Jesus cautions us we can't just almost get there and be sinful.
No, that is such a great point. So, all right, I haven't violated all 10.
That's
You know, thank you for convicting me today.
That's not all we've learned today. The witness by imperfect people, transport of Christ, then the witness by perfect people.
Correct. So if you look at the rest of this commandment, it also talks about not just crafting images or crafting idols, but it also talks about the fact, it says in verse 5, you shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. And so one of the things I want to focus on here is, why is this so important to God? And it's predominantly because he says, I am a jealous God. That is a characteristic of who he is. It is something that we need to really be clear about. And to me, I guess I would say that, oh, hang on a second. Yeah. Yes. But the key here is that I would substitute the word jealous for the word zealous. Mainly because in our lexicon, jealous has very negative connotations. It's clinging and spiteful, and those are not images that God intends when he talks about being a jealous God. Yeah, I think zealous is a much better word, because what it means is that he cares deeply for who we are. He made us in his image. He wants us to be everything that he has set out and that he crafted us to be.
I always looked at that jealous as God being
Intolerant. And we're going to see that. Yeah, because he even says here that he's going to punish up to the third and fourth generations of these people who crafted the idol. So it clearly has an element of intolerance associated with it.
He doesn't punish, but we bear the fallout from the sin of those other generations. I was looking in the notes in Ezekiel that I'm not going to punish the sons for the father's sins, but we bear
The consequences.
Yeah. Whether it's abuse or addiction or whatever.
So Moses prays and intervenes on the part of the Israelites, and God, instead of punishing them, essentially allows Moses' words to resonate. And so he's displaying significant grace and mercy here on the Israelites. And I guess to a certain question, and this gets to the point here about him being a holy, zealous God. Why would God tolerate that? Why would he tolerate the building of an image that doesn't reflect who he is, especially after leading the Israel people out of Egypt and all the miracles that he did to get them out? Why would he tolerate, especially within 40 days of them building this calf? Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of like God wants all us to be saved, but it's our will. We keep on going against our will, so if that's what they want to do. You can't, not because take away their will.
Yeah.
So
He refuses to not give us freedom. It's not like we demand something and we get it. He insists that we choose ourselves. That's part of his plan.
I got a comment on zealous and jealous. And I would take a position that jealousy is a more proper designation of what he's talking about for our own sake. Is that he didn't want us considering anything else. If he wasn't jealous, meaning absolutely no one else should be involved. I am the Lord. And we consider other things, opportunity for us to be taken away from him. I think jealousy, in that regard, is really apropos.
Yes.
It basically it diminishes God in our sight. and and that does not paint the right picture from God.
That's good. Yeah, and I mean, this is why we have Bible study. Zealous resonated with me because it had a much more positive connotation. I know jealousy in human beings is it's a very ugly portrait. But I think you're right in terms of what God desires from us. He wants us. He wants all of us. And He doesn't want us to be distracted or influenced away, although He gives us the free choice to do that. But something I read a long time ago, John Piper, he wrote a book called Desiring God. I never got past the first chapter because I couldn't understand it. But the one thing that I took out of it was that John, he defines this thing called Christian hedonism, which the way he defines it is that the chief end of God is to glorify God and enjoy Himself forever. And so when I think about being zealous, the reason that He is so patient and kind with us is because He enjoys worshiping Himself. And the more we worship God, the more we believe that He is the true living God, the more that element of His own internal worship is elevated. And I had a hard time with this concept initially, thinking, well, that kind of paints God as being so remote that it's just Him. He doesn't need us. Yes, ma'am.
The word jealous or zealous just is personal, is what I see.
Yeah.
It's just, He just wants that personal, it's individual.
Yeah. But the more God is satisfied with Himself, I think what Piper is saying is the more we will be satisfied in God. Because if He wasn't truly who He said He was, why would we worship Him? Because there would be something else that could be better, something else that could be more fulfilling. And so to that end, I think the reason He is a jealous or zealous God is because He desires that worship so that He ultimately can enjoy the worship of Himself. Yes, ma'am.
Pope Francis being in the hospital and all that, I feel like a lot of people are putting him into the idol position.
Yep.
But that woman came out as the bishop, as a Christian Lutheran. There's 3 synods, Missouri, the Wisconsin, the American. We rebuke, as a Missouri Synod person, to have a woman in leadership. Therefore, she is a fraud.
Yeah.
But yet, all these people across the world are sending her mail. And as a Bible-bearing Baptist, we are to rebuke people who are false teachers. Therefore, I want everyone to know that I've been out talking about that is a false fraud. She is not from the Lord.
Right.
Because she is not ordained to be in that position. And even Pope Francis, I don't feel is God. I don't feel like Pope Francis, I don't know the man, shame on me for judging him. I don't feel like he's in the Word.
Yeah.
I really don't think that his walk, his talk, is biblical. What do you think?
I feel the same way.
He's not biblical.
No. But there are other issues with the Catholic faith that
That's true.
is a topic for a whole nother conversation. I mean,
Next week.
purgatory all by itself would be a topic we could talk about, right? It's not biblical.
Purgatory from me, am I?
Right.
They're in Maccabees, they're in Second Maccabees.
That's right.
That's what, we don't accept Maccabees, either one is canon.
That's right. Yeah, there's lots of issues with the Catholic faith, and I think Pope Francis has. I agree with you. There are things that he's said and done that they don't resonate as being biblical. They don't resonate as being from God. But
They worship him.
yeah,
Why is that? The golden calf? He's the golden calf?
he's a golden calf, right? So
Jeff, There was a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I had a very helpful explanation of God's one time, that He is jealous for us, and people are jealous of the object of their jealousy is the.
Oh, I like that.
I'm jealous of them,
Right.
but God is jealous for us.
I like that.
Yeah, it helped me.
Okay, when I do my next lesson, can I get your phone number? I need to make sure I've got it. I should have asked Frank to help me with this one, because you were there when those commandments were. So I guess to put a bow on this whole jealous, zealous conversation, and I like the jealous for you, I think the image that we need to see here is that God is a loving husband, and we are his brides. And he has an exclusive desire for the brides that he has called to be his. And that's the image that I took away from this and that I want to build my life around, which is that I'm in a faithful, loving, monogamous relationship with the living God. And as long as I track down that path, many of the things that images could cause me to stumble with won't be an issue. Just a few more slides. I think you talked about this. Jealousy still leads to consequences, even though he may not punish the sins of the father on the sons. He does say in here that visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation, there are clearly consequences to the actions that the Israelites take. Who knows, this may have been one of the reasons why they wandered for 40 years in the desert. That they had lessons to learn, and it took them that long to learn those lessons. I think, though there is a clear tension in this commandment, and the question is how does a divine husband, in his holy jealousy, show steadfast love to a covenant bride who is manifestly and deeply sinful without compromising his justice? It's a great question. It's deep, and it has to do with God's grace and God's mercy. I think we just acknowledge that, the living God, Yahweh, he is righteous and he is just, but he is not going to sweep sin under the carpet. There will always be consequences in our lives for the sin that we commit. Romans 1:24 says, "Therefore God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them." And that's essentially, when we sin, we run the risk that God will allow us to remain in that sin until we learn the lesson to get out, or that we get on our knees and pray, or that we repent and move forward. So 4 generations of repercussions versus thousands of generations of those who love the Lord. I think it's probably a small price to pay. And we're the beneficiaries of being able to see the Word, read the Word, and heed the Word. Just 2 more points. One is that I want to link this to Christ, because this is the Old Testament, and one of the things you see here is that Paul obviously tells us that Christ is the image of the invisible God in Colossians 1:15. Paul also speaks of Christ, who is the image of God, in 2 Corinthians. And I think one of the things we see is that we're restored to the proper image of God through our relationship with Christ. That even though we're inundated with images day and night, magazine articles, ads, trying to get us to do this and to do that, one of the things that you see here is that it's Christ and Christ's redemption that allows us to remove those images and to see God in the way that God intends to be seen. And if you look at 2 Corinthians 3:18, and we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. And I think another key point here is God is not actually opposed to images. Okay, images, and this was her point, images in and of themselves are not good, they're not bad. They just are. And God, indeed, He made us in His image, so we are actually an image of God. He set Christ as an image of Himself. And I think He would have us be images that allow the unbelieving world to see what God can actually be and do. And then to kind of finalize this, so what does this mean for the contemporary church? I think if you lack missionary intentionality, I think one of the things that you will find is that images have subtly begun to emerge in churches across the nation, in religious organizations. Many of those images are borrowed from unbelievers. This fourth point here is, I read an article of somebody who is attending a church. They were an unbeliever, and they said, instead of making me want to become more like them, it looks very much as if they want to become more like me. So when you see church services that, and again, we've dealt with this issue, but I think when we had the debate between contemporary and traditional worship services, there was a strong feeling that contemporary services in and of themselves could become a distraction, an idol. I think we found a way to make that work, but you see church services today, and again, this woman from the National Cathedral, she's an image, and culture has been allowed to embed itself in the Lutheran faith. It's one reason why they are hemorrhaging believers, because it doesn't line up biblically with what people want to see. So the question for me is, who sets the orienting terms of my life as an act of worship? Is it God Himself? Is it my relationship with Christ? Or is it society? Is it culture? Is it the people who I come in contact with who subtly influence me, who might even put pressure on me to ignore my faith or to ignore my relationships with Christ? Is it God through His Word, or how much is it the world around me that influences who I am as a believer in Christ? And then kind of finally, just food for thought is, how central is God Himself in my life and in my worship? Any thoughts, questions?
Thank you all. Thank you so much, Jeff.